Marlene stood frozen on the brightly lit stage of the Harvest Festival, her hand trembling as she clutched a thumb drive that felt like a lead weight. To her left, the man the town called a hero, her husband, Rick, held his community award high, while his other hand squeezed her throat just hard enough to bruise. Below them, the local police chief didn't reach for his handcuffs. He simply raised a glass and toasted the monster. Marlene looked at the digital screen behind them, realizing the encryption key wasn't a code, but a date. The day her own signature was used to sign away the town's life savings. The crowd roared with applause, oblivious to the fact that their golden boy had just whispered a single chilling sentence into Marlene's ear. As the flashbulbs popped, she felt the cold realization that she wasn't just a wife or a waitress anymore. She was the designated fall girl for $1 million crime. With her escape fund turned to ash and the law smiling at her captor, Marlene had only one weapon left: a microphone and a secret that would either set the town on fire or bury her alive. The fluorescent lights of the Rusty Spoon hummed with a low-frequency vibration that seemed to settle right behind Marlene Cooper's eyes. It was the hour before dawn, that gray, liminal space where the world felt hollow and the diner smelled most potently of stale grease and chemical citrus. Marlene retreated into the shadows of the back pantry, the heavy door clicking shut to muffle the sound of the industrial refrigerator. Her breath came in shallow, controlled hitches as she reached into the hollowed-out base of a bulk-sized flour bin. Her fingers brushed the cold, gritty floor until they found the envelope. With the practiced movements of a card shark, she spread the crumpled bills across the top of a crate. 10, 20, another 10. Her knuckles, swollen and stiff from 12-hour shifts, moved with a frantic precision. Every dollar was a brick in a wall she was building between her daughter, Emily, and the shadow of Rick Cooper. She needed exactly $200 more. $200 to bridge the gap between their current life and a bus ticket to a city where the name Cooper didn't carry the weight of a local dynasty. She counted again, her lips moving silently, her pale blue eyes reflecting the flickering light of the single bulb overhead. The total was a physical weight in her chest. Not enough. Never enough. But as she tucked the money back into its hiding place, she felt the ghost of a smile. It was hope, thin and sharp as a razor blade. But it was hers. The bell above the diner door jingled, a sharp, metallic sound that sent a jolt of adrenaline through her veins. Marlene smoothed her apron, tucked a stray lock of dark hair back into her tight bun, and stepped out into the main cabin. The transition was instantaneous. The woman who had been shivering over a pile of hidden cash vanished, replaced by the waitress the town of Millfield expected to see. She picked up a glass carafe of coffee, the heat seeping through the plastic handle into her palm. "Morning, Silas," she said, her voice a soft, melodic hum that betrayed nothing. She moved between the booths with a fluid, ghost-like grace, filling mugs before the customers even had to ask. To the mill workers huddled in the corner, she was a fixture of the landscape, as reliable and unremarkable as the cracked linoleum floor. But behind that professional smile, Marlene was screaming. She could feel Rick's presence even when he wasn't there, a phantom pressure on the back of her neck. He had a way of making her feel like the very air she breathed was a loan he could recall at any moment. She watched the door out of the corner of her eye, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird every time a truck rumbled past on the highway. When the morning rush began to taper off, Marlene found the opening she had been waiting for. Silas, the diner's owner, was distracted by a delivery of frozen hash browns at the back dock. He was a good man, but age and a decade of turning a blind eye to Rick's business arrangements had made him soft and slow. Marlene slipped behind the counter and into the small, cramped alcove that served as an office. The air here was thick with the smell of old paper and the sweet, cloying scent of the syrup jugs stored nearby. She didn't reach for the daily ledger. Instead, she knelt and pulled a loose floorboard beneath the desk. A secret she had discovered months ago. Silas suspected someone was skimming, but he didn't have the stomach to look at the numbers himself. Marlene did. She was a forensic accountant in a stained pink uniform, her mind a steel trap for figures and dates. She opened the hidden black book, her eyes scanning the columns of figures with a predatory focus. The ink was fresh in some places, smudged in others. She worked with a silent, frantic energy, the scratching of her pen lost beneath the hiss of the grill in the kitchen. She wasn't just looking for missing petty cash. She was looking for the string that would unravel the entire sweater. The discrepancies weren't just errors. They were a roadmap of greed. As Marlene cross-referenced the diner's invoices with the mill's delivery schedules, a pattern emerged, one that made her stomach turn. It wasn't Silas who was the villain here. He was merely the host for a parasite. Large sums of money, disguised as equipment maintenance and consulting fees, were being siphoned out of the mill's pension fund and routed through the Rusty Spoon's accounts. The handwriting in the margins wasn't Silas's shaky script. It was Rick's, bold, arrogant, and unmistakable. Marlene felt a cold sweat break out across her brow. This wasn't just a small-town scam. It was a systematic betrayal of every family in Millfield. Rick was bleeding the town dry to fund a life they didn't have, a prestige built on the backs of men who hadn't seen a raise in 5 years. Her husband hadn't just stolen her spirit. He was stealing the future of everyone she knew. The realization hit her like a physical blow, leaving her breathless in the dim light of the office. The shift finally ended, but the weight of the knowledge she carried felt heavier than any tray of dishes. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the alley behind the Rusty Spoon draped in long, jagged shadows. Marlene stepped out the back door, the heavy metal slamming shut with a finality that made her flinch. She clutched her purse to her side, her fingers white-knuckled around the strap. Inside was the ledger, or at least the pages she had managed to photograph and transcribe. The alley was a narrow throat of brick and damp concrete, smelling of rotting cabbage and wet ash. She moved quickly, her eyes darting to the silhouettes of the dumpsters. Every rustle of wind-blown trash sounded like a footstep. She knew Rick's reach was long, but she hadn't expected the shadow to fall so soon. She was halfway to the street when a figure detached itself from the darkness near the hardware store's loading dock. It was Miller. He was a man built like a meat locker, with a buzzed head and eyes that held the flat, dead light of a shark's. He didn't speak at first. He just stood there, blocking her path, the orange glow of a distant street lamp catching the scar on his jaw. Miller was Rick's shadow, the blunt instrument used to keep the mill workers in line and the investments secure. "Marlene," he grunted, his voice a low vibration that seemed to rattle the teeth in her head. He didn't move toward her, but his presence filled the narrow space, suffocating and deliberate. "Rick's been wondering why you're so late. He doesn't like it when the dinner table stays empty. Says it makes the house feel unsettled." The threat was thinly veiled, a cold reminder that her husband's eyes were everywhere. Miller stepped forward, his heavy boots crunching on broken glass, and Marlene felt the walls of the alley closing in. Miller's gaze dropped to the purse she was holding against her ribs. He wasn't a genius, but he was a predator, and he knew the scent of fear. He saw the way she adjusted her grip, the way her thumb traced the line of the zipper. "What you got in there, Marlene? Silas says you've been real helpful with the books lately. Maybe too helpful." He reached out, his hand large and calloused, moving with a deceptive slowness. "Why don't you let me take that for you? Save you the trouble of carrying it all the way home." Marlene stepped back, her heel catching in a crack in the pavement. "It's just my things, Miller. Leave me alone." Her voice cracked, a sound of pure terror that seemed to embolden him. He lunged, his fingers catching the leather strap of the bag. The jerk nearly pulled her off her feet, but Marlene didn't let go. She couldn't. That bag held the only evidence that she wasn't the one who had signed those fraudulent checks. The fear that had been her constant companion for years suddenly curdled into a sharp, crystalline rage. As Miller yanked again, Marlene didn't pull back. She drove forward. She swung her heavy metal serving tray, still tucked under her arm from the shift. With every ounce of strength she possessed, the edge caught Miller across the bridge of his nose with a sickening thud. He let out a muffled roar of pain, his hands flying to his face. Blood began to seep between his fingers, dark and viscous in the twilight. Marlene didn't wait for him to recover. She grabbed a nearby pot of coffee she'd been bringing out to the stray cats, still steaming, still dangerously hot, and flung the contents directly at his chest and neck. The scream that tore from Miller's throat was primal, a jagged sound that echoed off the brick walls. He fell back, clawing at his scalded skin, and Marlene turned and ran. She scrambled toward the end of the alley, her lungs burning, her heart a frantic drumbeat in her ears. Just as she reached the mouth of the street, she saw something white fluttering on the ground where Miller had fallen. She skidded to a halt, her instinct for survival warring with her need for proof. She lunged back, snatching the paper from the wet asphalt just as Miller began to push himself upright, his face a mask of fury and blisters. She didn't look at the paper until she was 3 blocks away, huddled in the doorway of a closed laundromat. It was a bank receipt, crisp and thermal printed. It showed a transfer of $50,000 from the mill's operating account to a private holding company. Marlene's hands shook so violently, the paper rattled. She had it. She had the smoking gun. She found a small, 24-hour park on the edge of town, a place of rusted swings and long shadows where the police rarely patrolled. Sitting on a damp wooden bench, she smoothed the receipt against her thigh. The numbers were staggering, but it was the name at the bottom that stopped her heart. The funds hadn't just been moved, they had been authorized. By her. There, at the bottom of the document, was a signature that looked exactly like her own, the same looping M, the same sharp C. Rick hadn't just been stealing, he had been building a cage of paper and ink. If the authorities ever looked into the missing money, the trail wouldn't lead to the mill manager's office. It would lead straight to the waitress at the Rusty Spoon. He hadn't just been framing her. He had been erasing her, ensuring that if she ever tried to leave, she'd go straight from his house to a prison cell. The walk back to the house felt like a march to the gallows. Marlene turned the corner onto their street and saw Rick's silver sedan idling in the driveway, like a predator waiting in the tall grass. He was leaning against the hood, his suit jacket off, his white shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal his thick, powerful forearms. He was tossing his car keys into the air and catching them with a rhythmic, mesmerizing snap. "You're late, Mar," he said, his voice smooth and devoid of the rage she knew was simmering just beneath the surface. He held up the keys, the metal glinting in the porch light. "And since you can't seem to keep track of time, I figured you don't really need to be driving around. It's for your own safety. You've been looking so tired lately, frazzled." He pocketed the keys with a finality that made the air feel thin. He wasn't just taking the car. He was taking her legs. He was tethering her to the porch, making sure the world outside Millfield remained a dream. He followed her inside, his footsteps heavy on the linoleum. He didn't yell. Rick rarely yelled. Instead, he leaned against the kitchen counter while she began to move mechanically, setting out plates for a dinner she couldn't eat. "I've got some news," he said, watching her with those flat green eyes. "The mill's downsizing. Economy's tough, Mar. I had to let a few more people go today." He paused, letting the weight of the words settle. "Which means I'll be taking some time off. I'll be working from home for a while. I think it'll be good for us. More quality time. I can keep an eye on things here, make sure you're getting the rest you need." He reached out and stroked her cheek, his thumb dragging across her skin like a brand. The message was clear. There would be no more secret audits, no more late-night counting of tips. He was closing the circle. Marlene kept her head down, her eyes fixed on the floral pattern of the dinner plates. "That sounds nice, Rick." The lie tasted like copper in her mouth. "Good," he whispered, leaning in so close she could smell the expensive scotch on his breath. "Because we've got a big weekend coming up. The Harvest Festival is in 48 hours. After the ceremony, I've booked us a little trip. A surprise. That old cabin up in the Poconos, the one my father used to own. We're going there for a few weeks. No phones, no neighbors. Just family." Marlene's hand slipped, a fork clattering to the floor. The cabin. It was a ruin, miles from the nearest paved road, surrounded by hundreds of acres of state forest. If he took her there, she would never come back. The festival wasn't a celebration. It was a deadline. She had 48 hours to find a way out, or she would disappear into the trees forever. That night, while Rick slept the heavy, untroubled sleep of